what leaders have to do, it seems to me, if they're honest and realistic, is find ways of giving direction to their business while saying, I don't know what's going to happen.
Welcome everybody to the next edition of Be People's To Be Continued podcasts. I'm Ralph Tribe, I'm the co-founder and managing director of Be People, and I would normally be joined today by my co-founder and colleague Jess Hilton, but unfortunately the train strikes have got the better of that idea. So it's just me. She'll be back the next time. And today I'm delighted to welcome two very special guests, people that I have been trying to get on podcasts, and particularly if it's our podcast, forever, at least as an idea. And they are Kathleen Saxton and Dom Loehnis. And I'm assuming I pronounced that correctly, Dom, because your name is definitely the hardest thing to remember how to spell.
Imagine it were L-E-R-N-I-S.
Pronounce that for me.
Loehnis.
Loehnis. Okay, well, I've learned something already.
It's German.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anyway, so Kathleen and Dom, welcome to today's podcast. I'll let you do a brief introduction to yourself, and then I'll open up to the audience, what we're here to talk about today. So Kathleen, give us your quick rundown of a very, very long and illustrious career. So I know that might be hard, but I know you're going to give it your best shot.
I'll do my best. I'm getting older, so it's getting longer. But in short, I was in the media industry for about 25 years as an operator. I became a headhunter, which I'm sure Dom and I will talk about. I then trained and became a psychotherapist, and I now practice in that space and specialise in trauma. And then I trained also as a mediator. So I put all those things together and advise boards now and individuals about how to become the most self-actualised people and organisations that they can be. That's it.
All right. Quite a smorgasbord of different things connected, but what was the connection for you?
The connection for me is the human condition.
Okay.
I'm absolutely fascinated why we do and don't do the things that we do, and how conscious or unconscious we are in doing that. So I find people, even if they're badly behaved, I'm fascinated as to why. And if they're extraordinary at performance equally in their personal or professional lives, I want to know why. I want to know what the magic is. So it's human condition.
Very good. Did you mention just then that you're doing mediation?
Yes.
Okay, so how does that fit into all of this?
Well, I thought it would fit very neatly, as in I come from a commercial world, so I like to make deals, but I'm also a psychotherapist, so I like to understand people. So going into the training, I thought that this would be very easy for me until I did the training, and then realised that actually I have no place in leading any witnesses. I have to follow what the humans want to do and do my very best to see if I can help them find commonality. But I think this is something that weirdly Dom and I also have in common. But it was a very sharp learning for me when I undertook the training.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. Dom, I know there's a connection there in mediation, but take us through everything that happened before that. But again, at high speed for a very long and eventful career, no doubt.
A slightly confused career, I would say. I started out writing lyrics for musicals. The first sort of 10 years of my career, I did, I think, 6 different jobs. And then in my 30s, broadly, I set up a company in the US putting radio stations online at the beginning of the internet, and then came back and did a TV production company called Monkey. And then having sold half of that, I became a headhunter, did that for 17 years. And then 3 years ago, decided that I wanted to indulge myself in learning more, and became a coach of people, of individuals, of teams, looking at systems, people systems, and consulting on that. And that's what I do now. I find it really hard to describe what I do, because every 2 weeks a call comes in and I go, yeah, of course I could do that. And it's something completely different. So, yeah.
All right, so where does mediation come into that?
Well, as I say, I think the thing that stopped me from headhunting after 17 years is I'm obsessed with learning all the time. And once you're doing a search for the second or third time, you sort of can't really feel or identify what it is that you're learning. And so one of the spoiling things that I've done on my own is to constantly try and develop new skills. The latest thing I did was certifying as a mediator earlier in the summer and going through exactly the experience that Kathleen describes.
So for both of you then, so with mediation, which ironically we're not necessarily going to talk that much about today, but I'm just kind of fascinated about it anyway. So when you get some mediation that needs to be done, like how does that crystallize? Like what, the phone just goes and someone says we've got a team in crisis or a sort of a relationship in crisis in our organisation. Can you please come and help? Because having been a chief people officer myself, I don't think we ever used a mediator. We probably should have done. It wasn't like there weren't moments of sort of crisis in teams and in relationships within the organisation, but I'm not really sure they were really available to us. So, how does it sort of just pop up? This is a need, and you start to engage with it.
I did the mediation course to have mediation skills. I think it's quite unlikely that I'll do a lot of formal mediation. I haven't kind of closed my mind to it completely, but I really did it for the skills.
Right. Okay.
So I think because I do couples therapy as a psychotherapist, I felt I had some skill in mediation, but I was very interested in bringing it into the corporate world. So like Dom, I'm a life learner. If I'm not learning, I get a bit itchy scratchy. I kind of feel that we only have one life. And my view is I want to do everything I possibly can while I'm still on this mortal coil. But for me, what I've had so far, early days for mediation, has either been, yes, a phone call of we have a direct conflict going on between two parties, or we have owner founders that have sold a business and the business that's bought them, there's been a miscommunication or some sense of an issue between the two of them. Can you come in and help them maybe see eye to eye? The other phone calls I've been getting are people saying, we've got this issue, what would you do about it? And then it's whether or not I say, well, maybe mediation could be useful here or not. But I think mediation is so different to so many other things because most of us that have come through the commercial world in whichever form we have, we're looking for a win-win situation. There is something in mediation that harshly might sound like lose-lose, but it certainly feels like you're going to have to give something in order to try and find a common ground where people can agree. But of course, the threat to it is if you don't do that, you might be heading to litigation, which is a whole world of pain. Yeah. So there is something around people, and what's the beauty, I think, and I don't know, Dom, if you found this, of the process of mediation, because you have time alone, the parties have time to think about what's really going on, is that the individuals or the parties are able to begin to think about best and worst case scenarios and often therefore come to their own conclusion that we can find something in the middle. That's it at its best, I think.
Mm-hmm. Interesting to kind of hear that, though, because it's so on the one hand, you've said that it doesn't happen that often. Dom, you've said that you actually did the training for the skills and you're not entirely sure, whether the phone's going to ring from someone going, actually, we've got a situation here that would really benefit from, the skill of a mediator being deployed in it. And I'm here as someone who was a CPO going, it never occurred to me that I should have done it, but now you've mentioned it, perhaps there would have been loads of opportunities for that to add value. Kind of curious that we all seem to be in agreement, and I suspect people listening to it would go, actually, having heard just a snippet about that, I can see how that could be very valuable, that we all think that it's quite unusual for it to be identified as a need in an organisation and then acted upon. Do you think that's going to it's going to happen more, that people do clock it over time, or do you think it's going to constantly be something that leaders, which we're going to talk about in a sec, just don't really sort of clock that this is something that could be made available and could be helpful in their organisation? What's your sense of that?
Well, Kathleen has possibly thought about this more, but I think one of the reasons that mediation is growing so much is because courts are actually mandating mediation instead of litigation. And so I think where it very often shows up in organizations is in HR disputes. And I think that it'll be one of the things that HR leaders might take to a CEO as an alternative to and a way of avoiding legal action. And in that context, I think it's a really smart alternative. I mean, I do quite a lot of work, for example, with co-founders, or with, it might be co-founders where one or more of the co-founders is no longer in an executive role, and yet the compensation looks the same. And in those sort of areas, having some of the tools, and as Kathleen and I both experienced, we've had quite long advisory careers, and yet the purity of mediation, in the sense that you are not proffering advice at any point in time, is quite hard to do, but you see the benefits of it when you do it. And so I can imagine it being used a lot more.
Yeah.
Particularly in that context where you've got an organization and an employee in conflict, or two employees in conflict.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's something about the neutrality of bringing in an outside party. I think often for corporates or businesses, the loss of control of that could feel challenging. But for the two parties, the sense that this individual has come in completely clean and they are literally there to try and help you both evenly, fairly, with some hopeful, calm wisdom and true listening skills, I think allows both parties to breathe a little bit and believe that there may be a chance that their opinion and their angst and all the things that have come with it will properly be heard and will be part of the ingredient to hopefully knit them back together in some form.
Yeah.
To that point, the thing it reminded me of most that I did do was team interventions. And in a team intervention, it is, I think, impossible for a team to heal itself, because the problem that tends to be going on is there are certain things that the system cannot talk about. And so just bringing in a third party to surface the stuff that they can't talk about and somehow hold a container so that they can talk about it and begin to resolve it, almost always has a value that the team couldn't do on its own.
Yeah.
Yes, so much so. And it is a real privilege, because you obviously hold all of the secrets and all of the disclosures as the mediator, or if you're co-mediating between you, and you get the whole world view, as they call it in mediation. And it's a wonderful space, because then you can start to see, I can see how this has come about, and I can understand how each of the parties feel, but I can also begin to see where the commonality might live, which may hold the magic of the solution.
All right, brilliant. Okay, so look, I think we probably are going to come back to this a little bit as we talk about the very sort of connected sort of main theme, if you like, of today. So what we wanted to talk about today was, to be specific, how to make leadership work in an increasingly anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible environment. So there's quite a lot to unpack in that. And we're going to sort of do our best to try and do that over the course of this sort of podcast. But just as an introduction, and just so anyone kind of listening to this doesn't sort of think that we've just made up the idea that things are getting more complicated and incomprehensible, our reference point actually at Be People is something that we've become increasingly interested in, which is the idea of a BANI world. And I'll explain BANI in a moment. It comes from a book that we were introduced to by another client, written by the futurist Jermaine Cascio. And the book was called... it's a bit of a long title, so forgive me, but to do him credit as I read it out, Navigating the Age of Chaos, a sense-making guide to a BANI world that doesn't make sense. And before anyone sort of listening to this goes, well, it doesn't make sense to start, because I have no idea what BANI means, to give people a sort of a shortcut to that, given that there's a great book to be read on the subject, but you probably haven't read it as yet. People will be familiar with the idea of VUCA. VUCA environment, an environment that is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. I mean, that phrase has been around for, I don't know how long it's been around for.
15 years.
Yeah. I mean, 15 years.
Plus.
The more you look at these things, actually discover it's probably been around for 25 years. Just no one really got the zeitgeist moment with it until 15 years ago. So I suspect most people, chief people officers, people-oriented chief executives, or C-suite sort of players, probably are very, very familiar with VUCA. But actually, when we got to sort of talk about it with clients, situation we sort of got to is going, it's been around for so long that people just sort of say the word and forget what it means, and it's just a bit taken for granted, and it's got a bit lost. So when we had someone that we know who mentioned, if you want to refresh people's sort of engagement with VUCA, which would seem like a reasonable thing to do in the world today, maybe you should sort of engage people in the idea of BANI. And to introduce BANI then, so BANI it stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear, and the word that we particularly like, which is incomprehensible. And when we got into this conversation with this great individual, we were like, yeah, totally, because certainly whilst this book was written in 2018, is my understanding, so a lot longer ago than you might think, I think certainly in the last 18 months, the world has suddenly become really quite complicated, at perhaps a different level for the average punter on the street, which we would include ourselves in that. Things like, there are more conflicts going on in the world. We are not quite sure what all of that means, but certainly we haven't had many of those for the last 80 years since the end of, the Second World War. So it's new to us, and no one really has any living memory of what it means to exist in a world where, there are sort of more existential threats to your future rather than just, have I got a job? Can I earn a wage? Can I pay my mortgage? AI is certainly something that we think has suddenly got people, depending on the person, animated, flustered, worried, many things. And that, whilst that's been around for a while, it's not like sort of, pattern recognition is a new technology, but suddenly everything, it would seem, that we're reading and everything that we might be starting to feel in work, the conversation about artificial intelligence and what it can do to work and the world, it's complicated, and for certainly starting with me, it's a bit incomprehensible. Got to make sense of this. So we thought it'd be really interesting to find two sort of experts in the world of sort of executive coaching and leadership development to have a bit of a conversation about, well, what's your experience of, how leaders are either not adapting or, perhaps more positively, how they are adapting to leading well in a BANI environment, one that is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Here's a question for each of you. If you had to describe how most leaders are experiencing the world right now in one sentence, what would it be? But without being unfair about this, we'll give you the opportunity to explain why your one sentence is what it is. I know that you've prepped a little bit before this. I've no idea whether you've come out with one sentence, but if you have, go for it. What's the sentence in all of your experience? And then just give us a bit of an explanation as to why you summarised it like that.
That there is no such thing as steady state anymore. I think it's self-explanatory, but I think people used to sort of lead in sprints and go, oh, come on, we'll go through this, and then we can calm down and think about moments where they sort of galvanize the organization, and then there'll be a moment of calm and BAU, and that doesn't exist anymore. It's like lurching from one surprise to another, everything being unpredictable, and the organisation in a constant state of uncertainty and perhaps angst.
What's your experience then of a reaction to that in and amongst the leaders that you kind of work with? What's their reaction to the fact that there's no such thing as steady state anymore? What are you experiencing?
I think tiredness. I think it's exhausting. I think this is really the toughest time to be a leader in my lifetime, certainly, because your team and your org is under all of these unpredictable changes. I also think, and we might come on to this, that boards aren't necessarily brilliantly placed to support. I hear loudly from my friends who are CEOs the absence of any board members who have been through anything like this. Most board members had their exec careers in a completely different context, and decreasing numbers of board members actually have operated at senior leadership levels.
Yes, operational
interestingly.
levels. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Then more non-operators, less people who've had big leadership responsibility. And I was talking to one the other day who just left, who said, in all my time, when in this case this person was being publicly attacked by a predecessor, I never had one call from a board member saying, "How are you doing?"
Wow.
So I think for leaders, you see more and more leaders leaving voluntarily, which is kind of interesting. More and more people just going, "I've had enough. I'm knackered. I'm stepping down." And you see that in all the evidence of the average tenure of CEOs coming down, and coming down sharply.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a sec. Kathleen, what's your...
Mine's similar, but obviously when we were at the Lighthouse, we used lots of lighthouse analogy, but we used to always talk about that classic saying, which is calm seas never made a good sailor. And for me, it comes back to the same thing, which is as a leader, both personally and professionally, you've better put your life jacket on, because now in the world, at the change of one thing, the business could turn on a dime. The one revelation or the one slip up that you make, your career may also turn on a dime. So you've got to have some level of bravery and fortitude to take on that remit of leadership. It's not a tenured role in the way that it used to be. And we'll come on to the brittle in a second, I'm sure. But there's something for me about being really ready to be able to ride those waves and therefore have some level of malleability to the way that you lead and operate. Because if you're fixed in the way that you do something, at some point, there's going to be a snap.
Okay, so you were just saying, Dom, about we're seeing the age of chief execs sort of come down, yes?
The tenure. How long they are in role.
Tenure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're just stepping off?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, and some of them are being fired. I mean, think of the Coldplay concert. The tenure of CEOs is coming down dramatically. I mean, like in double-digit percentages each year.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think the juxtaposition to that is our technology is leaping and leaping and leaping. So you've got a speeding up of skills that you require and understanding that you need to adapt and adopt. And equally, you've got individuals that are trying to keep up. So we've got an ego question, I think, that comes into that too, which is, as the leader, are you willing or able to say, I don't fully understand this, but I'm going to get in the trenches and learn it?
Yeah.
Or is the ego such that you can't let go of your CEO title enough to say, I need to go back to school, even while I'm in the role, but I need to go back to school on this particular thing? It's very tricky if you didn't grow up with some of this technology. I mean, AI being a perfect example right now.
Yeah.
You know, how many CEOs have really gone and meddled and played with and experimented and built something in their own level of naivety? Are you allowing yourself to be naive while still being the leader? That's quite a stretch for some people.
Because this is something that really fascinates us, right, at Be People in the projects that we're engaged in. We do a lot of stuff around AI and helping teams sort of embrace and adopt AI. You know, there's lots of people doing that. But one of the things that we really kind of noticed, and to your point, this is, technology is floating around and making this world, more complicated. A lot of these chief execs haven't, or C-suite have not used these technologies and so on. Now, this always fascinates us because we got that in a world before AI came along, right? And the engines like a Copilot or a ChatGPT and so on. But we don't get it quite so much now. I mean, positively, we think there's a really easy breakthrough, right? Because it used to be with technology that you did kind of need to understand it to use it. And to us, one of the really fascinating things about AI is the big difference is you don't really need to understand how to use it, right? So we were talking to a colleague the other day, and they were saying, it used to be that to interrogate a massive database, you needed to be able to write a script in order to do that, even in a fairly kind of common technology like, a Workday or whatever. with a ChatGPT or a Copilot and so on, the amazing thing is about it, it allows you to do exactly the same interrogation where you don't have to have skills in writing a script. You literally write it in a completely imperfect free form, and boom, lo and behold, it does a job of analysing the data. It may not be a good job, or it may be a good job. There's lots of things to be sort of discussed outside of this about the quality of the job that engine does. But the amazing thing about this technology is it allows anyone in. And our observation then is, so why aren't more chief execs and C-suite noticing that? And then sort of going, okay, well, I can engage with it. I can just play around with this sort of stuff with a completely imperfect script. I could just sort of muse over it on a train if I've got connectivity, and ask it some really profound questions about my business and see, whether it might offer anything helpful. But what stops people at the most senior levels in an organisation making that observation and sort of going, well, I'll go and have a play, because everyone we know who has in one of those positions suddenly feels much more able and much more able to make a leadership contribution with their teams and their colleagues around that. What are your thoughts?
I think they're playing with the technology as it is today, and then they go, okay, here's what it can do. But the technology where it's going, I think you have to be fairly technologically literate to know where it's going and what the implications are. I was this weekend talking to a very successful professional photographer, and I think I would have assumed, a published photographer, and I would have assumed that was something that was pretty sort of bomb-proof, because people go specifically to that person to say, I want my portrait done, or whatever. And he said, no, I'm having my lunch eaten, because actually a lot of what I did were big gigs over multiple weeks for a corporate where I was taking lots of pictures around everywhere and blah, 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 blah. That's getting AI'd. And so I think it's not, as a chief executive, it's not just fiddling about on ChatGPT and going, oh, it can do all this stuff. It's all right, we've got bits in our business where we're adding value, where AI could come and rip it away tomorrow. And the speed at which the technology is changing means that I don't think it's self-explanatory in any way. I think all of these breakthroughs, there are whole businesses that are getting, think about offshoring and the offshoring of some of those basic coding skills. Those whole businesses could be wiped out, right? So I think it does depend in what sector you're in, but I don't think, I think there's two things. There's one, what does the technology do to your competitive advantage or your place in the value chain? The second thing is, what's it do to the people who work for you? And one of the interesting things about the move from VUCA to BANI is that VUCA is a description of an environment. It's vulnerable, uncertain, complex. Whereas BANI is personal. It's what it does to us, brittle, anxious. It's how we feel. And I think that that's one of the big shifts that has happened, is that you've got a terrified workforce. Now, a terrified workforce is not going to be a very productive workforce, right? A terrified workforce is not going to be a very innovative workforce. A terrified workforce is not going to be a very engaged workforce. And you, as CEO, are being asked to give certainty in very many cases, where the whole notion of a complex and an increasingly complex environment is that what worked in the past doesn't work anymore, and that there aren't any right answers. And so that is a profoundly harder thing to deal with. So it's not just the technology per se, but I would argue that actually you have to really understand the technology per se, because it's evolving so quickly. And if you think about the amounts of money going into that technology, there are billions, trillions going in to make it evolve quicker and quicker. But it's also about the impact of everything that all of your workforce is reading. And the other thing that's happened in the last 15 years is the expectation that you as CEO will have a position on all these things.
But then you see, I think a soft skill comes in, which is around inspiration. But it connects back to education and vulnerability. Because, so for example, I went to the Future of Media conference in Oxford last week, and there was amazing people demonstrating what they've actually done in their businesses with AI. So it's a proper schooling of what they've actually done. And I think the more people that can sit and see what the possibilities are, the more they can think, well, actually, I could take that and bring that into my business, or I could. But the point to the people is around, how can I tell the story of what the business will look like and how that can still be exciting, but it will be different. There will be change. You will change your role. You may retrain in something else in the business. There's something about finding inspiration in the future. Whereas I had experiences in some of the businesses I worked in where there was lots of chat about it's saving us money and aren't we great because we're at the cutting edge of it. But deep down, they weren't addressing that it would also fundamentally change the P&L, and nobody wanted anyone to change the P&L. So there was a huge tension between this great advocacy and inspiration at one end, but actually, if it actually changes our fundamental charging model, I'm not very happy about that. Yeah. So there's something about being able to be willing to lean right into it, to go and learn it, to go and take inspiration from others that are slightly ahead of you or in other sectors, and bring it back in and inspire with the underlying truth that this will change life as we know it, or our company as we know it, forever. In increments, but it's happening, rather than trying to pretend, oh, well, this section will be all right, the photographers will be all right. Well, maybe not, but they might be able to learn to do something else with it.
Yeah.
Back to your point about existentialism, there is something fundamental about it's going to change our lives, and there's no way around that. So are you going to resist it and hold on, or are you going to try and be a bit more in flow with it and do what you can to embrace and learn?
What's your actual sense of how fast AI is actually changing things? Because I was reading an article, I think it was a commentary on, the very sort of AI exposed technology companies, and, obviously got super valuations at the moment. And there seems to be a sort of a nervousness out there that actually the absolute sort of tangible commercial benefits of AI will come rather later than the hype, particularly as expressed through share price, would suggest. And that has been a trend with all new technologies, actually. The enormous amount of hype about, the internet and what it might do. Of course, in the end, it did change everything. But it didn't change things quite as quickly as all of the hype, might be. What's your sense of that with AI? We don't really have an opinion at BP because we don't know. We are very caught up in the idea that there seems to be a lot of noise about this, and we are seeing some things, particularly operationally, getting quite profoundly affected by it very quickly in reality. But strategically, we don't know. We haven't seen many companies being completely wiped out yet in a nanosecond because AI sort of stole their lunch. It's not complacency, but it's just like we just haven't seen that evidence. What's your sense, talking to leaders and execs as you do? You may be closer to, oh no, Ralph, like you're kidding yourself. It is a bit more profound and it is a bit quicker. What's your sense of that?
My experience has been, we came off the back of the metaverse, which was meant to change absolutely everything. And it became enormous and then completely slumped. Yeah. And so you've got some cynics out there. And I think AI is a completely different ballgame, but I think you've got some cynics, and maybe it self-serves them, that are, I'm not going to get too overexcited yet. I'm going to peruse from the edges and see what happens. And you've got other businesses like some of the ones I sat with the other day, where they've taken certain markets, they've taken certain parts of the business and gone full on in adopting AI in it to see. They've taken some bets. And I think this comes back to, you've got to be allowed to take some bets. And if they tumble or they don't work, does that CEO get fired, or were they lauded for actually bothering to try and have an experiment? So there's something going on with psychological safety and all the stuff that goes with it. But I saw, when I was in Oxford the other day, I saw 3 or 4 businesses that have fundamentally adopted it. And they showed me statistics that showed that it has absolutely changed, improved margins and all sorts of things in their business. But the thing that was common to them all was, even if it was just one market or one function, they went all in on it to see whether or not it would change something. And And it did. I guess they're only going to tell me the happy stories because that's what they're there to do.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that you've got different, again, it's back to personalities. You've got different people that are cynical, those that sit and wait, those that go all in and make mistakes and come back and reverse again. So again, this is where leadership comes into this, and the stomachs of some of the VCs, PEs, and those, the shareholders of these organizations, your risk profile then really comes into play, I think, with this as well.
Yeah. Okay. Dom, your experience?
Well, I think the fundamental thing about complexity, and I think complicated, there is a right answer. You just need to be quite expert to navigate it. I think what's happened is we're in a complex world where you pull on one lever and something unexpected happens somewhere else. That's what I think the definition of complexity is where previously independent systems become interdependent. So everything gets linked up. And the fundamental nature of it is we don't know. So we don't know what's going to happen. I think you look at certain indicators like entry-level jobs and the massive, very recent, massive plummeting in entry-level jobs. I think that is largely impacted by people going, I think maybe we can AI some of these entry-level jobs.
No more spot matching for us, Dom.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think that the answer is what leaders have to do, it seems to me, if they're honest and realistic, is find ways of giving direction to their business while saying, I don't know what's going to happen. Okay. That's difficult.
So let's come on to that and unpack that a bit. But as is always the case with these podcasts, we always we go positive, right? Because we know there's a lot of media out there that sort of is very happy to sort of dwell on the negative, because I guess bad news sells. That might be true, but we're not that into bad news on our sort of podcast. We'd rather give sort of helpful advice, tips, and insights. So we're going to go positive, but we're going to go there from a strange place, right? So I think we've agreed that whatever's coming with things like AI or some of this other stuff, it could be big. And definitely resistance is futile. So that seems to be something that we're agreed on. And we've also talked a bit about, and we've got to help a terrorised workforce through this. And I know that sounds like a dramatic word, and it might well be. There's probably, we could go and chat to lots of people and they go, well, I'm not terrified at all, don't worry about me. But you get the sense that there is an anxiety out there all of a sudden about what this means for jobs. So we've got leaders who are going to have to accept that some changes almost certainly coming. Resistance is futile, and I've got to manage a really, quite a lot of anxious sort of people through this. I've got to help them through that and lead through it. So what's your experience in this sort of modern day with a group of leaders in the different organisations that you work with, of the things that really help? Let's not dwell on all the habits that probably hinder. I mean, we probably guess at those quite easily. Maybe the rarer insight is, what are you observing which is really working for leaders having to do a good job in this environment? Kathleen, your experiences.
I always start with congruency and honesty, and I know that different businesses will have different levels of that. But to me, we've been banging on about purpose forever and a day. My translation of that is, if a human really believes in something, if they can really get on that adventure with you and you demonstrate to them that you are consistent and as honest as you can be with them, they'll go over hot coals for you. They will follow you into places that might be unknown to them. So for me, there is a big responsibility for the leaders to try and be that. And I think we've got much, the humans now can sniff the minute that someone is being incongruent, or that they don't really believe, or that they're covering something up. And I feel that it's those leaders that actually bring a bit more of their genuine realized selves to work as leaders that get many other people engaged, even some of the disenfranchised. But you've got to be willing to be as honest as you dare. And the second part of that I know that Dom and I do agree on is, Has that leader self-evolved enough to know who they really are? And that is work that many people shy away from because it can be difficult and ugly and painful and uncomfortable. But when you are a leader that is very sure about what you believe in and who you are and what your values are, and you display that consistently in your organization, people will follow you to all sorts of places if you do that. To your point, when you are uncertain, we look to leadership. And that is what you're there to do as a leader. So are you ready for that? And are you willing for that? And if you're not sure who you are and what you're doing, people are going to withdraw pretty quickly. So there's something about the individuals doing the work on, do I know who I am, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and can I transmit that successfully to all the people that are looking to me for the answer?
Yeah, great.
That makes sense to you?
It makes complete sense. Okay, Dom.
I go back, I think there were some amazing examples of leadership in COVID, and the CEOs that I know, if you get them in an honest moment, will admit they really enjoyed COVID. Because in a crisis, in chaos, that everyone looks to your leader, right? You want to be led. So they had a mandate to lead. And there were lots of really interesting things, the lessons that were learned, some of which we seem to have gone backwards on. But one of them was communicate. People communicated far more. The leadership communicated with the org far more than they did before, or sadly, probably in most cases since. The second thing is, tackle more of what needs to be done in cross-functional teams. So a lot of people were amazed, a lot of CEOs I know were amazed at how much they could get done by essentially not running the org through the sort of vertical hierarchy, but running it through a series of cross-functional projects. And I think that actually that lesson hasn't really been hardwired in enough organizations, because I think too many organizations are still really tilted vertically, and most of the problems that need solving are horizontal problems. I think leaders showing vulnerability, saying when they didn't know, was a really important thing that happened in COVID. So I think all of that, I think it was a sort of high watermark for trust in leaders, and you still see it. You look at Edelman, and people are looking to trust leaders more than they do politicians or the press, or et cetera, et cetera. But I think as the crisis has ebbed away, so some of those practices, which actually were really good practices, have ebbed away. I think the thing that most leaders find harder is actually operating in a complex environment where strategy doesn't, and I think outside of crises, that's the environment in which most leaders are being made to operate. Because in a complex environment, you're being asked for a strategy, but strategy doesn't hold together. You're being asked to give a direction, but actually you know that something might happen with an AI innovation in a minute that completely knocks that out the water. And that, I think, is the biggest, and that's where I see leaders really struggling, because actually what you need in a complex environment is experimentation, and you need to learn through failing, and you need people to drop their expertise. And most of us sit very comfortably behind the sort of armor of our expertise.
Totally. Can you become a novice when you've been an expert for the last 15 years? How comfortable are you doing that? And there's another expression I learned through my therapeutic work years ago, which was there's no such thing as forever, which I actually found devastating personally when I was going through that. What you can say is, as far as the eye can see. And again, back to the leadership, which is for the moment, for today, for next week, maybe even to the next month, I think this is what we're doing and this is the answer. But it might get to October, November, and it might change again. But I will tell you, if that's the case, that's, if we can begin to understand, as far as the eye can see, I'm telling you what I think's coming, but it gives me license to say, actually, we're going to switch again. Forever doesn't exist anymore.
And to come back to what you were saying earlier, to tie that to a purpose, like here's why we're here and here's where we're headed. There are certain things that we can't, because not everything is complex. There are bits that are still fairly straightforward. There are bits that are complicated. There are bits that, here's what we know is predictable, we're going to stick with it. But in these other areas, rather than focusing on the outcome, we've got a direction, and let's focus on the process. And the process includes behaviors and values. So I think the job of leaders becomes about direction setting and purpose setting that's congruent with them having done their work, and then really holding people to account on the right values, really holding people to account on whatever experimental processes you're doing. And it's about setting the environment. There've always been certain jobs like this. I remember there was a job at the BBC where you didn't run any of the channels, but you were head of television. So almost everybody else reported into a channel owner. And it was like, I remember likening it to being sort of head gardener in one of the Eden Project's biospheres. Your job is to make sure that the temperature's right and the humidity's right and all of that. It's a very subtle thing. And I think more and more leadership roles are about that, providing the right environment where people can do their best work, holding people really focused on the areas where you can focus. And then in the areas where you're going to have to try stuff out and learn, giving them the sort of psychological safety, which is sort of often misused, but giving them the ability to have difficult conversations, fail, learn, and all of that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Now, we're great believers in finishing any conversation on a high. It's like you should always leave a party at the best bit rather than sort of letting it go to the very end. So we're going to have to finish it there, because I feel like we're finishing on a kind of a clear high, some sort of clarity around what leaders might want to consider in terms of adding to their sort of repertoire of skills and sort of considerations in this BANI environment. I've got one final question for you both then. If you had a billboard every senior leader would see tomorrow morning that would help them lead through this environment, what would it say?
I know what she's saying and I know what I'm saying. I'm trying to work out which one would follow better from the other. I was going to say, do the work, because I do think that what we require of leaders now requires a more, but when I mean do the work, I mean really work on yourself. If you need to do therapy, do therapy. Be a very well integrated person, because I don't think you can, what we're requiring of people requires such versatility. And if you're disintegrated, you're going to come across as completely flaky and inauthentic. So I think that leaders really have to be well-evolved human beings to lead properly today.
Brilliant. Kathleen, we'll...
Mine is know thyself,
Yep.
which I guess is connected. But if we bring it back to the, calm seas never made a good sailor. If you're going to go into a stormy sea, which you're bound to as a leader, that vessel better be watertight and it better be pretty shored up. It's going to be if you've gone and done the work. And that's the best chance you can have as a leader to provide the service and the duty of care that you've signed up to when you sign that CEO contract.
Perfect. And on that note, I think let's end the party. So look, all that remains is for me to say, Kathleen, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thank you for having
Absolutely
me.
Brilliant. Dom, likewise, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It's been brilliant, and it's been brilliant to have you both in the same studio. I don't think that's ever happened before on a podcast. You are both, as I said, icons. Well, originally of the search sort of world, and particularly in the media sector, which is obviously where I spent a lot of my time, and then more latterly in the world of sort of executive and senior leadership development, both in the same room. What a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thanks, bye.